This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, according to Minhag Ashkenaz, there are 45 kinnos that are the liturgy of the Tisha B'Av service. Many of the kinnos are very difficult to understand because of their structure, because of their language. Says the Torah in Siman Tav Kuf Nun Tes that when it comes to kinnos, the whole congregation needs to understand them. Men, women, children, says the Torah, even the young boys must understand what we're saying. And therefore, as every year, for the sake of greater understanding and to enhance the meaning of our Tisha B'Av service, we're going to be selecting specific kinnos to cite, to focus on, paying attention to the historical background and some of the key phrases of these kinnos. We should point out, though, that even if someone does not understand the full meaning of the words themselves carry tremendous kedusha. The most well-known of all the Paitanim was Rabbi Eliezer HaKalir, who is universally accepted as the father of the Paitanim. Of the first 15 kinnos that we say this morning, Rabbi Eliezer HaKalir is the author of the first 15. Says the Shibolei Haleket that he heard from his father, who heard from his teachers, that when Rabbi Eliezer HaKalir composed the piyut about the Malachei HaShores, God sent down a fire from Shamayim to encircle him. The Mari Hertz writes that when Rabbi Eliezer HaKalir would recite a kinnah, when he would compose a kinnah, this was his formula. He would utter a name of God, and then he would ascend to the heavens and have a chavrusa shaft. He would discuss the composition with Michael, and Michael would teach him exactly how to compose it. Rabbi Eliezer HaKalir was certainly a great personality, but there is a degree of uncertainty regarding his identity. Tosfos Masechta Chagiga Daf Yud Gimel, he identifies Rabbi Eliezer HaKalir as none other than Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The Rashba, in the Tshuvas HaRashba, Siman Tav Samach Tes, he identifies him as the great Tana, Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach. In any event, kinnos were certainly written by a great figure, and every word carries great significance. Okay, we begin with Kin Avav. Just a very brief introduction. Kin Avav, the Kin of Shavas. Shavas means everything came to a standstill. Everything stopped, suddenly, unexpectedly. Sometimes people realize intuitively when a disaster is impending, and psychologically that allows them to deal with the impending disaster. The Mekoinen, Rabbi Eliezer HaKalir, expresses that the tragedy of the Churban was not just that it happened, was not just that it occurred, but it happened suddenly, without any warning. People didn't expect it to happen. They woke up in the morning, and suddenly the Beis HaMikdash was no longer. And they were not able to deal with the sudden disaster. Kin Avav Shavas. Shavas uvnani shemuni ayvrai srimay sazmin vedre chaver az miskan mizrach zavirai zakaz vumi bayras gavucha madu ayvrai zakaz miskan mizrach zavirai zakaz vumi bayras gavucha madu ayvrai zelavirai navoy dein mitzod khoyeni khsakhadan ben barach yad pelay gagal khavuya ini moy lala zivanes nakhuya zavani khama yikrol vkhiya benamalilani vkhiya Abnei Feroz nufsu chasida bagesim zachagaru yisayda Tagel ejulay dam sayda Batzachazira yara yechazida Batzumasay aryelenida Berzatzian riyada Larzian zadushanim medanai Tzava rashid zian zadainai Tzamsuvanad lamoid zadainai Tzaynat zardo erim medanai Tzakami bimei vendinai Tzadiku adainai atakalim Nirvata meyedi Ermuni gerav devoyi Levayachari muni Garza yoshe Givoy noid heim zermuni Kaili liyashmi Maravi Grimuni, Kumi Avari Basal Harimuni, Garasila Mava, Yamari Muni,
Lamaruach Abin Ladar Jamaru Isagizan Iram Hamaru with the Yamamazmi Yamar after the Yadihazan going to my Maro, Raven Ahidem Migoya Maro, Adina Gizali May Hamar Maro, Hajivenu Sisi, Jimalagai Sayani, Jim Ramaz Hatzer, the Hankini, Zuzay Mishire, Mirdamula, Divini, Jamaz Maras Avechan, Latata Ini, Shahu Venadu, Hatzas Avrieni. Shamukin and Hanai. Kidam Rak, the Rezoi Banner, didn't love him, as even in the Shakaram, Koiskamas, Bibina, the Razovana, the Elzar Jagilano, the Vajamas, the Remanial, Nihalano, and the Galavaglano, Zagin Marcos, Givalano, Ramabino, Amakalano, the Haradoino, Yalano, Kino Zion, Echat, via Bella, the Memuna, was a hard, the Brisbane was so much a mirror to live Hunecha. V'chein bitinu zechar Adonai meha yalanu eicha gar to v'gar azel l'gos v'adgim gulech v'zachat adligas dilog derech shadolak galit galech v'chein dibarnu zechar Adonai meha yalanu eicha akta v'agyoy necha v'yarei l'mamay necha v'zachat v'yud v'esek v'ezes asher v'yata livudecha v'chein v'koinanu zechar Adonai meha yalanu eicha zonachta v'zamech l'zal v'yad zam zvulecha v'zachat achitun chugei chai v'shachak akta lachamulecha v'chein chivinu zechar Adonai meha yalanu eicha dorachta v'dar Echal Javiad Darvim Tilayach of Lazachad, the Karidis Yosha, Yahad Aliadech of Kenyalano, Zahad, and Yalano, Echal Givan to Vachasecha. Alles werden gegeben Garmech, Lazachad, Lazachad, Mashali, Madal, Kurach of Rinlag, Nozhad, and Yalano, Echal Milat, and Mayasech, and Khasiad, and Manasech, Lazachad, and Sias Nisas, Nashash, and Asasul, and Suach of Keno, Zahad, and Yalano, Echazachta, Bisarecha, Nazabiat Savim Sadecha, Lazachad, Yadoi Mashari Tarta Lavadech of Kenonina Zahadin Yalano, Ekamatsu Vivagda, Halavagam Yadbaritzim Viliach of Lazachad, Salah, Sweet Sadik, Shetzavan, Soecha, Uvachain Saaknu Zaharadin, Yalano, Ekagas of Agrias, Halagnos, we had come Guru Ech of Lazachad, Regesh, Rechabi by Samasharat Tisul Reach of Kain Raganin, Zahadin, Yalano, Ekashaft of Shavecha, Shalas Yadim Shalmech of Lazachad, to give Taltali Zayar, Shartikantalis, Mimech of Kaintan, and Zahadin. Yalano Ta'anta lishbach demois kamayim amebi yom zen ishbinu v'amayim zachi b'yosi b'shava yesheves b'Yerushalayim ragad v'yatader chug shamayim. You go to Kinnot Yud, Eicha Yashva Chavatzos Hasharoim, V'dam Amroim V'pinoi Se'aroim, V'noam Mishmaroim V'ganim B'nei Aroim, Kinnim Sarbayas V'misarveh, Marain Bachis of Yom B'chumeshes Sefarim, Gnerek, Kaim Ravim Yamaki Borim, Yadam and Nishchat Barachim Kitzvirim, and other Kitzibarim Kanetzibarim. Kosa Meyar Sakala Mikushada, Bavain Masos Shmita, Ve'arbas Shivatim. Mayor. We are much better moves, but I had to shut the Mishmas Mujada, Dagger, Jamogan, Brazos, I'm not going to come see live, I was showing me live, and I'm busy like I Tais alive. Hayoy Malim and Malacham Melach, and give it Lala Boris or Lachem or Rabu, Smo, Mimam Milachem, give it Lushtala, Vivays Lachem, Nizadar, against of Nechmos, Murray, or Roshachiba, there's no room, there was a bunch of no good Yodvas, so as Manashan has a Nishmay, Shiur, something like Yabolana, Rafu, Khair Khatam Yamrala Loza, Liga Visita, Vazia, Labragino Knav, Margizia, Vayitim Wanya, Kaparuziel. Timosa, Nima, Vanala, Rabba, Viana, Navagram, Yavim, in Miskar, Milanera, Yanavarza, Vivazable, Mamma, Kolama, Koinino Kino, Kirisuli Alcana, we're going over some Kino, another Mikin Mishmas Alcana. Voila Moroi Mayan Savas, Vazaval Rasri, Baz Vizik Musar, Baz, and Eras, Venobas Koyensvas. Mi Moroi Mishmi, and a lazy time, Mikani, Vino, Mishigoya, and Vagralaya, Vino, Vigiva, Mi Mine, Mishmas Base Goyin Mine. This guy, I love him in a Chav, Gushav, the Anuna, Mibli of, and him not in Militsap, save a minimum of, and also like Kino Mishmas, yes. Yashava Sila Birai Maria Ravalin is Galiaki, that's Maria Maria. Utsagay Rav Area Mishmaras Madaya Gabi Kharshu Maricho Man is very cool like Harvachan is very basic Samas Visanis Drazon is Yatsa Yavon is Barsavian Yada Shelak Mino Bashkim Vashalaya Vushbazabris Melach Main Chamamula Brosh Mamla Sadik Wadina Kifu Maras Biaru Aruari Soiba Aras Samur Aziv is the Mosgina Malan Ras of Gazir Nizra Nizras Nizras Karasi the Suri the Kali Layar the Ganati Vayaba Arab Kamaner Adele Marav Rekala Makala Arab Reiki Sarti Kania Bisani Vanio Gali Gazana de Menuya when a man Magnonia Jamukini something Mahatz with Sakana and Sumadas Maram Juya Bujadi Jamar Bubia Niazuya not the base Goya Shamakina something but Sakana was also many Trina Blinas only Rakam and Maganino Mikarias Honano Gibarikana Tamiras Uniadamin Rishasu Sharash Mimin Nashimachar Yamin Aban Silam Nog in a sign Salmin Tava Samriach v'choshki tazriach v'chadesh atzmoisenu tafriach v'reach michoichenu gegedem tariach u'mishulchan chatariach shulei chamas ariach.
The most important Kinnot that we recite on Tisha B'Av is Kinnot Yud Aleph, because the recitation of Kinnot Yud Aleph was ordained by none other than Yirmiyah Hanavi himself. When King Yoshio was killed, the pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, Beis, Parak Lamed Hey tells us, "Vayikoinen Yirmiyahu al Yoshiyahu." Yirmiyah himself lamented the loss of Yoshio. Vayoimru kol hashorim v'hashoros b'kinoisam al Yoshio ad hayoim. And all the male singers and all the female singers mention Yoshio in their lament until this day. Vayidneim l'choik al Yisrael, and they made it a law. Now whenever we mourn for Beis HaMikdash, we mourn for King Yoshio. The death of Yoshio was considered so tragic because Yoshio's greatness was unparalleled. Never had an individual brought about such a nationwide Shuvah movement. In fact, the Navi tells us in Malachim Beis, "V'chamayu lo haya lefanav melech, asher shav el Hashem b'chol levavoi v'chol nafshoi v'chol ma'odoi kechol Toras Moshe." There was never a king like Yoshiyahu, v'achrov lo kam kamayu, and never again will there be a king like him. And this is what we say in the Kinnot. If you look on the 6th line, Gam b'chol malchei Yisrael asher kamu ligdar, on page 182. Also, of all the kings that who arose to defend Klal Yisrael, to fight idolatry, Loi kam kamayu miyimos Avigdor, nobody rose like him since the days of Avigdor. Who is Avigdor? Avigdor is Moshe Rabbeinu. The Gemara Megillah says that Moshe Rabbeinu had 10 names on Daf Yud Gimel. One of Moshe Rabbeinu's names was Avigdor because he was Avi kol goydrei peretz. He was the father of all who made fences. Yoshiyahu's grandfather was the wicked Menashe, who committed the early years of his reign to spread Avodah Zarah throughout Eretz Yisrael, and he was so successful that he was even able to plant an Avodah Zarah in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. At the end of Menashe's life, he tried to do tshuva, but unfortunately for Eretz Yisrael, it was too late. Avodah Zarah became so deeply entrenched that they could not eradicate it. Menashe's son, Ammon, was also an idolater. And for 2 years, he continued to corrupt the region of Yehuda until he was assassinated by the palace guards. His son Yoshiyahu was only 8 years old when he began his reign. It says in Melachim, Ben Shmoina Shana Yoshiyahu b'Malchai. You hear this, the king of Israel was 8 years old. Now even though, if you take a look in the Kinnah, on the 3rd line, we say, Ben Shmoina Shana Heichel Lidroi Shmei Aleikav, that he began to seek out Hashem in his 8th year. It means the 8th year from when he became king. Because the Gemara tells us that when a person becomes king, the Gemara says in Yuma, it's as if you were born. So the Kinnot does not mean he was 8 years old when he began to seek out Hashem. It means when he was 16 years old, 8 years into his reign. In the 18th year of Yoshiyahu's reign, something happened that would eventually change the face of Israel forever. Chilkiyahu, the Kohen Gadol, who was the father of Yirmiyahu, he was making long overdue repairs of the Beis HaMikdash, and in the course of his work, Chilkiyahu discovered a Torah scroll. This was a Torah scroll, and this shook the face of Israel. This Torah scroll had not been seen since the time of his grandfather Menashe. Now, many of the English Kinnot say something which is a very big error. And it's important to know this. And it's important to know you can't believe everything you just read in English. And that is, many English Kinnot say that Yoshiyahu's predecessors, Menashe and Ammon, so thoroughly eradicated the influence of Torah that no one in Eretz Yisrael had seen a Sefer Torah for 18 years. You have to know, not only is this an error, it's apikarsos. Why? Because this comes from the Christian Bible scholars who want to say that the chain of our Messiah was stopped for 18 years. It's nonsense. What was so significant, says Rabbi Victor Miller, Zechariah Levracha, about the finding of this Sefer Torah was not that they hadn't seen a Sefer Torah for 18 years. What was so significant was which Sefer Torah they found and where the Sefer Torah was open to. What Sefer Torah they found was the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu himself. And where was it open to? It was open to the pasuk in Kisavai, Yoylech Hashem Oischa v'Yes Malkecha. Then not only will God lead out the Jewish people, He'll take the king out as well. And Yoshiyahu was so moved and so terrified from this impending prophecy that God will hold him responsible, that the king issued the following statement. Because as he opened up the Sefer Torah, he saw the words, Or asher lo yakum es divrei Sefer HaTorah azois. Cursed is the one that does not uphold this Sefer Torah. And says the Yerushalmi Masechta Soita, Yoshiyahu cried out, Oleinu lehakim. We have to uphold the Torah. Yoshiyahu went into motion. He made a massive assembly. And he made everyone take an oath to commit themselves to the Torah b'chol lev u'b'chol nefesh. Yoshiyahu sends out detectives to search every home, to make sure that no home had internet. Avodah Zarah. And they searched every home. And they made sure every home was filtered from Avodah Zarah. But they missed one. It's not that people had little pocket, handheld Avodah Zarahs that they hid in their pocket and they kept away from the detectives. No. They had a very ingenious system. Chazal say they used a double door system where they posted the Avodah Zarah in the back of a double door. So when the inspectors came in, the doors opened and the Avodah Zarah were hidden. And Yoshiyahu naively thought, unfortunately, that he had eradicated Avodah Zarah from Eretz Yisrael completely. At the end of his reign, Paro the Lame, requested of Yoshiyahu peaceful passageway through Eretz Yisrael to be able to attack Assyria on the north. Yoshiyahu, thinking that the Jewish people were on a perfect level, he said, we can't let you in. We have a promise from God that when we are on the highest level, v'cherev lo savar ba'artzecha, no nation will pass through even for the sake of peace. Yirmiyah comes running to him. And Yirmiyah says, you're being naive. The Jewish people are still serving Avodah Zarah. But Yoshiyahu did not want to listen. And instead, he decided to ask another rabbi. He asked Huldah Hanaviyah, Huldah the prophetess, who he was hoping would have a more sympathetic point of view. But this was a great error. And this is a great error that repeats itself in our own times, where many people rationalize their behavior. I asked a rabbi, while not all rabbis are equal. One has to follow the advice of the Gedolei Hadar. And that was Yoshiyahu's error. When Yoshiyahu denied passageway, Paroi Nechai went out to war against Yoshiyahu. And as we say in the Kinnot, page 186, on the first line. Samuha kimatara lachitzim. They made Yoshiyahu like target practice. And they pierced his righteous body 300 times. Now, if you were to think about people who died gruesome, grotesque, torturous deaths, Yoshiyahu HaNavi Yoshiyahu HaMelech would have to rank there on the top of the list. You know, we live in a generation where everything is top 10, top 10. Who's the top 10 this? Who's the top 10 that? Well, top 10 most torturous deaths, I would put Yoshiyahu on the top of the list. And this is very hard to understand in light of the fact that there's only one person in history that God has come to and given a personal promise that they would die in peace. And that is Yoshiyahu HaMelech. Yoshiyahu HaMelech is the only person in the whole Tanakh that the Rebbeinu Shalom came to him and he said, don't worry, v'ne'asafta l'avosecha b'shalom. This is peace. This is dying in peace. This is the worst death in the history of mankind. Says the Gemara Moed Katan Daf Chav Ches, Yoshiyahu died in peace. Why? Shaloi charav Beis Hamikdash biyamav. Because he did not have to witness the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Points out Rav David Leibowitz, Zechat Tzaddik Levracha. We see from here that Churban Beis Hamikdash is such a nightmare, such a disaster, such a horror, that being tortured to death is paradise compared to having to see the Churban Beis Hamikdash. Kinnot Yud Aleph Vayikoinen Yirmiyahu Al Yoshiyahu. Eicha Elikonu Me'elav and Shmona Shana Eicha Lirosh Me'elav and Eicha Me'avram Chanu Alav Lo Yizgar Loi Sigum and Balagam Mechamachi Yisrael Shagam Aligdar Lekam Me'maisav Igdar Yam Mechilin Zane Adar Shagam Anu Yadal Eslizdar Oylim Zara Yizar Gizo Yadar Bicham Mizra Megdala Mejim Yaminachar Vailashal Yodem Minalar Zagu Amarav Kinam Das Logim Yisam Rasavur Yakim Lashadar Kini Azur Chakim Vasamar Zaydas Lugim Vegam Ram Nagu Shalad Malach Mali Balagayim Nasala Yedayam Ored Zavim Aliyan Vizias May Malach Gilam Manan Azam Narayim Lan Laisabar Chayvagol Shub Ephraim Lasham Malachais Allah Shavachayim Gzer Nixar Lasachzim Mitzavim Mitzrayim Megadas Ziras Mitzvahs Chazainan Isaiah Elavazais No, I know Chumay Le'avdas Vayzivan Avdavdas Surayinu Adlai Shia Vayimon Saramani Saini Shia V'negrav Gagariv Le'yozul Aridia Vayramar Lamach Yoshia Idena Vaytzemina Begam Yoino Chatzim Chitzak Aretz Mayram Alay Chatzim Zadu V'zamug Matar Lachitzim V'zguvash Shleish Meyos Chitzim Kale mitu achrav esoin moitzav viyu v'yad mitzay nevesh masav viyu razav asav esav viyu tzadek v'adena ki marizi viyu zisi nogi nezam v'sham shoynu ma'vayin b'tzav dam yazim adav hamzo b'fam shemekan alam galera yuam dam megar echad goyz migidai l'shaz ma'jinaz hashmita kagel ezo ezalav esur mishtay ma'aroz shazak yizav tulay echam esur mishtay mozios oisois kinois lubata mechayli eski shachachti mechayli lizam oisilar yahili Rashati v'nosad v'nutashali Kinnot Yudaled Eicha es asher kvar aso Davameni liglois neshiyeyo Asher adloi shechagim nimtachim v'shali ramaz Ezar zayyo v'ilo ezar v'zachar Ezar magim v'shizam v'zvonim v'charev v'vonim v'achar v'chavicha Kagalas ayachar zachar zishan Gasham miyuda v'gan manuazu meguda Azar Shidor Nita Sai Noida Layasa Ganezum Gada 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 Goimas Yitzer Zazazim Levano Gomiro in Arabza Gavano Gona Sada Besal Izavero Yamazo Gazar Tavaliba Givat Biasa Vaikonin Lavecha Yaka Sar Sar Lai Marja and that's here not to Gada Ria Azimino is Nihini Shamaja Yanaya Mizabim Mizamar Gazar Arbamal Yazurena Mitzara Tavasharam is like Mazina Zera Vaya Salas Niza Vema Vasa Givizra Nazadim Gazra Iran Very Vanena Valagodaza Zabina Piana Ajamigazena Valina Zana Zana Zana
Dove Marli Yamin Minum Zanina, Mokum Sharshim, Maganin Raja is Violum Yardim, Yaman Vagiva, Huraidim, and Iravam, Medina Garidim, Yamdavazo, Mayardim, Pardon Zulmatun of Nivo, Masmar is now Lena. Alema Bekarki, Sekavas of Shara, many man is well, Vinam to Maraski, the Valtav, Lane as man Gilagalai, Gilagalai gets off Zumat, Michigan, against Muzumana, against Kaman, Yashushallah, Lane as man gets a lot of Mazay is Vada, Aviliam, Shaloi Noida, Kimita, Hasha is Vada, Shadarazu, Nesta, Kalavanixam. Name you color ya come again as this one now color you gonna you color gets like shula menam shlach na biyat shayma da tzalilesh talach agaladi shula we might some highways of the Yamagas, Liba Mechan the Sharmi, so by the name of the Zavasa. We had Rama, when I go, we may remember when we are the Roma gas and Asham again, the Master Mamma, the Lazali, if I will go to Mirai Martin, we had to lie on TV in the Iagnet, Victor. Nisha Rotas, the garden, Glazim, Yamazum, the Baris, other Yasmo, that side with Dafko, is Matting Eslam, Shamavagayag, Shamam, his Mac, Makal, Yakaba, Mr. Valko, doesn't know. And I will be on the Malay Yashamir as all the other misconduct as Galar as well to be Amhagal in the Shila, Dimogilad, Yasham, Maislai, Paula, Shagama, Shila, Agiava, Shila, Reason Alamisa. When I was actually by Nasrama, Vera is on the Kamasha, also, we always was the we do large allegation of love, we learn Saya and Arashaya Vela, Yamixian. So I see an Egnas and Lasamaga, is on Savara Kalam lived and Mahamasa, and Nozanos and Biasu, Sae, Savilani, write me. Tanda Balaka, me, Boys, we come to Clancy, Vela, give me a Bahari, I have no Nigumi. Going out the house now, we look at some new Gazi, may I know of a Gash, Arba, Mincha, Ryan, Abshis, the new Commission, Mishama, may I know Tushabar, and as of the new Gam Shamline, Nocha, Yada Bamova, Shimmerishim Kura, Yaga, Narisal, Kinnis, Hakevo, Oila, Husa, Javu, Magiri, Miss Island, Balag, my big arm, Jimmy, Zoom, the Gorman, Brazil, my diagram, the Gorgon, Tamak, Mezzle, Magiri, Kira, Merak. Make our Gurim, Halam, Lashem, Zagram, Alim, Ganunits, and I got my garm cover on my Nil Galamazeli, Amaze, Equanusai, Yagada, I remember Haviz, I remember Hiragan, Hamel, Shine, Havo, Shine,
Kinnot Tezayin was written by Relezer HaKalir. The Kinnot describes the unspeakable acts that the wicked Titus perpetrated when he entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. Of course, Titus was the Roman general that destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash. Actually, the siege against Yerushalayim began by his father, Aspasionis Caesar, by Vespasian. And when Vespasian was elected the emperor of Rome, upon the prediction of Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai, Vespasian appointed his son, Titus, to continue the siege. The Gemara in Gittin says, on Nun Vavam and Beis, that Titus began his assault against Yerushalayim, not only with an arrogant declaration against the Jewish people, but with a declaration against God himself. He said, Ey Eloi Kemoi Tzor Chasayubai. Where is their God? He was unparalleled in his defiance and arrogance against Ribbon Shalom. In Avos Rav Nassan it says that when Titus Harasha entered the Beis HaMikdash, he pounded on the Mizbeach and he cried out, Lucas, Lucas, Wolf, Wolf, At Melech, you're a king, V'ano Melech, and I'm a king. Boi v'aseh yimi milchama, come let's do war. Says the Gemara, Titus grabbed a Zoina, a harlot. He brought her into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He spread out a Sefer Torah. And in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, on the Sefer Torah, Titus committed the unspeakable act. He proceeded to take his sword and then slash the paroiches. And the Gemara tells us, blood began to gush forth from the paroiches. And Rav Isaac Sher asks, even though the Gemara says that Rebbeinu Shalom made a miracle for blood to gush forth from the paroiches, so that Titus should think that he killed Kiviyachal the Rebbeinu Shalom. But God doesn't just make miracles for wicked people to think and make mistakes. What kind of lesson was this teaching Klal Yisrael? Says Rav Isaac Sher that this teaches us a fundamental lesson. That the Beis HaMikdash is the lifeblood of the Jewish people. It's the leiv. It's the chiyus of Klal Yisrael. And when the Beis HaMikdash is being destroyed, that means the world is suffering cardiac arrest. It's like a dagger to the heart. It's like we were slain and we were killed. Titus then takes the paroiches and he wraps the kalim of the Beis HaMikdash in the paroiches. And by the account of Josephus in the War of the Jews, number 11, 97,000 Jews were taken captive, and the death toll, either by the sword or starvation, was 1.1 million. The Romans minted a special coin for the occasion. I happen to have a copy with me. The Romans minted a special coin, and on one side is the head of Vespasian. He's garlanded with a victory wreath. And on the other side, a Roman soldier is depicted leaning on a spear, while a forlorn Jew weeps under a palm tree. By the way, this coin continued to be in circulation for 40 years, even after the Churban. Now, there's an inscription on the coin. I'm going to teach you a little Latin. Also, it's not correct in the English Kinnot. It says, Judea capta. Now, many people think it means, and that's what's written in many places, Judea capta means, Judah is captured. Capta is miloshoin kaput. Capta means they're gone, they're finished. Judea capta. Judea is finished. But our consolation, of course, is that while the Roman Empire has crumbled, and all you see of the Roman Empire is a relic of the past, here we are today. We have Torah institutions, we have Batei Knesiyos, we have Batei Midrashos, we have yeshivas all over the world. If you look in the beginning of the Kinnot, Zachar Asher Asa Tsar B'fnim, the Kinnot begins. Remember what Titus did in the Beis HaMikdash. Sholaf Charboi Uba Lefnai V'Lefnim. He went into the innermost chamber. We say, Nachlasenu Bies Ketime Lechem Apanim. He struck terror throughout the land as he defiled the Lechem Apanim, the showbread. V'gider Paroiches Balas Shtei Panim. And he pierced the curtain that had two sides. The Paroiches was embroidered in a way where there was a picture on the front and a picture on the back. It's machlokes in the Yushalmi, either a lion on the front and a lion on the back, or a lion on the front and an eagle on the back. We skip to the bottom line. The Mekoinen laments the irony that when the two sons of Aaron, great people, in a way, Chazal say even greater than Moshe and Aaron, when Nadav and Avihu brought a strange fire into the Mishkan, these holy tzaddikim were punished by bolts of lightning emanating, entering their nostrils and consuming their innards. And yet when this wicked Titus commits the unspeakable act in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, nothing happens to him. Avoseinu zora kechnisu bachura v'achla. When our ancestors brought in a foreign fire, they were consumed in fire. And this man brings in a harlot, and he's not consumed. Every morning, the Kohanim would wake up and remove 93 vessels from the Mishkan, says the Mishnah in Tamid, Parak Gimel, in order to prepare for their Avodah. Ominously, that morning, something happened that never happened before. You look on page 228 on the 6th line. Oireinu namak kehishkim mishares. Our skin seemed to melt away in agony when the priest, when the kohen woke up. V'loi matza tishim ushloisha klei shares. He was not able to find the 93 klei shares. The Kinnot mentions Sarim lupasu kivai paretz, on the 10th line. The princes cringed when the wanton one entered. The Yalkut Shemani tells us that the Malachei Hashares, the Jewish people felt the angels would be able to protect them. When the Nevi'im came and warned the Jewish people of the impending disaster, Klal Yisrael said, you know what, we're not worried. We know different shemos, different names of God. If the Goyim come, we'll just utter different names of God, and they'll protect us with water, with fire, with snow. We'll order the Malachim to protect us. But on that fateful day, Hashem substituted their jobs. So when the Jews tried to summon them, they said, sorry, it's not our job anymore. They were not able to protect. 13th line we say, V'saru ki yuzak b'shishim riboy mazikim. That the Klal Yisrael thought that Titus would have been injured by 600,000 demons. The Medrash Rabbah and Devarim relates that when the Roman soldiers came to destroy Yerushalayim, 600,000 demons awaited for them to destroy Titus. But when they looked up in heaven and they saw the Ribbon Shalom retreating and not protecting Klal Yisrael, the Shadim, the demons, made a Kavachomer. Kavachomer, which we spoke out in Shiur many times. Kavachomer corresponds to Midas Harachamim. Yud Gimel Midos Shatar Nidrashis Bahem corresponds to the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim. Normally in Chazal, when you see a Kavachomer, it means there's a great Hisoyrus of Rachamim. In fact, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Meisels writes in the Hakdama of the Sefer, Mekadshe Hashem, that in 1945, he had a premonition that the war was ending. Why? He didn't read newspapers and he didn't hear any reports. But grass started to grow in the forests, and he started to eat the grass, and he was reminded that the first Kavachomer in history was made by grass. Because Chazal say that when Hashem told the trees to grow leminehem, the grass made a Kavachomer. That if trees normally that grow by themselves have to grow leminehem, Kavachomer, grass and shrubs and bushes that usually grow intermingled also have to grow leminehem. So if the trees are growing by themselves, we the grass certainly have to grow by ourselves. The grass made the first Kavachomer in history. And if you look in the Yud Gimel Midos Shatar Nidrashis Bahem, Kavachomer is the first one. It corresponds to the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim Kale, said Rav Tzvi Hirsch Meisels. The Ribbon Shalom, by giving us grass to eat, is showing us that very soon He's going to be Ma'oireh Rachamim on Klal Yisrael. But here, you have the exact opposite. Where because Klal Yisrael had so much turned Midas Harachamim into Midas Hadin, even the Shadim were using a Kavachomer against us and to harm us. This is Kinnot Hazayin Zechar Asher also Tzar B'fnim. Shalach Harbe V'al Tam Lam Hazin V'yes Gitin Alechem Aponim V'yde Baruch V'al Shtevon V'zom Giyah V'magim Ma'adam Hayamadid Kav V'marei Adam V'mimeno Dolar V'eshkar Chitzav Midan Kiyatsa Min Abayi Zechar B'mlei Adam Ala Goy Zayav Gaber V'nata Aleo Yadel Mu'el Gaber Sayim Chalaim and Bar Gaber Ani Mizachi V'ya Yaretz Ela B'tzara V'ysen Azar Kichnizu V'charva Nachla Zaina Tzaya Zayin Nechwa B'ay Javad Namritu V'zachem Lambazesh Ama B'veisesh V'maram Jalachish V'navshina Davanu God Tzidlei Shares V'samam Ba'ani Shayed Bam Hi Shares Harinu Namakish Kim Shares Zayin Matzatish M'shlesh Klei Shares Nashim Gijaro Giva Aretz V'karka B'ayz Na'alam Hecharetz Saram Lupasu Givai Faretz V'leiz Kodesh HaKadoshim Tzachanasa Yeshretz V'achor Mimachot Tzagom Mechuzakim V'sar Ki Yuzak V'shisham Ribai Mazikim Zekin Nebasu Kershu Mishchakim Asay Zutzanim Asr Bazikim Shabbat Zaydim Vayavay Admai Vayasabim Vayavay Samay Navla Evra Nini Bitzim Lach V'laz V'yarmai Hakini Tashim Daik Amma
Abba Zachar Rabbi Zechel Rabbi Rashid Tafsir Allah Chaviva Yad Samar Rabbi Zechel Sigoi Tzagach Gotzen Rabbi Mayad Gotzav Devir Shei Salvanas Yod Mashin Vam Gomam Misham Lahavnes Lamarag Shagam Lashia Shatel Abin Champinais Vishal Chaviaretz Let's Vishal Svinois Hashivenu Shivoi Gavok Nivre Minivchayam Vishitvu Atzmam Yachalin Bobayam Shivasish Bachais Shokal Yam Gyala Chayragnan Tzalazim Gizam Izmo Anab Sham Gozis Vas Moishachan Chilul Mamoshan Tigvazim Nasam Nation Mibashan Vaskon Nishma Rola Mazishan Kinnot Yedzayin Im Toichal Nonoshim Piriyam Ailai Tibuchim Alaili Dvashan Nonoshim Rachman Yosod Mamadudim Dvachim Dvachim Alaili Im Tigvazim Pasar Shem Sekishan Elisuzim Dvachim Alaili Nyonig Lachik with Simon Sechichim Alaili Im Toimen Azailu Mazai Bayin Avashas Banin Tzarchim Alaili Im Tivayan Azailu Zutini Benech Chavim Minutach Nesachim Alaye, this man of Zara was a man and Mares with Shichem Alayim to Huyavna Banis of Hikimoi some Nispachim Alayim Tatois Naruka Solim Merkos Goyat Bukhim Alayim Tiakarna Bishikorechem Simushadaye Alayim Digajan Najman Mez Magina Maravalukh Alayli until Hanurucham Mine Maluchim and I does the Hamalayim to Man, a male of Mayam Mayan Saran Lachat, Hamalayim, the noise of the Mazari, Hashmain Malav Ganim Brachim, Alayim Tisaravna. Shamkal is someone of us who got some with Malayim, they are up now, them Nakish, my Malav Ganim, Mishuk Malayli, empty back, then of us, the Karmi Rat and Vashi Malayim, did Savarna, Lamana Shagabin, my Hila, the Minukachim Malayim, to Kana Shlish Yankim Alzaha, Haras Mesuchim Malayim, Tera and Arakas Vanuas, Kamuas, Ayad Rav Tabach Malay, Dish Gav the Mishvatayim and Noise, the Divya Mishabach Malayim, Tesalav Navas, Zavachur, Misiman, Schichim Malayli, Ragasam Marim, Yakosh Hinak. Raman Shikura, my dear, Sasha Rasulai, my dear, the Hana Nashim, Mashmim, Yarim, Tisha, like the Navi, like Mashmim.
Kinnot Yates, L'chadin Hatzdak, Avoises Hashem Lizamios, Viadat of Lanabois, Abanav Hashem, Nitzrap, Voisan of the Amda, L'chadin Hatzdak, Avoimegav, Gazam Azais, Manabash the Banam, and the Fashion, Nimsavana Gamazim, Asas, L'chadin Hatzdak, Avoimegav, Manabash the Banam, Yam, Yamsov, Kaivali, Bifashim, L'chadin Hatzdak, Zayrubiata, Meidamani, Alayim, Manabash the Banam, Karbino, Alina, Bisim, Komasi, Lanu, Alayim, L'chadin Hatzdak, Vidam Shahid, Tam Tana, Gazabim, Vidwash, Banabash, Banavim, Mikravno, Bana, Sons of Shaman Udwash. Khadin Zang of Gomano, Hariam, Modana, Banabash, Banamaka, my sin will lay and be Ragnan, the Khadin Zag of Berla, Hassan, the Berlanabash, the Banamini has a Slav, and Hatzers, a Gizam Dubar. Khadin Zag of the Sikhan, we are Hamam, Kinnot, Banabash, Zabanim. Be'agan Hashem b'leim Tzayman l'chadin Hatzdak v'vayajim ba'atam be'arba'asam v'yishim v'nubaj l'ben b'sam michayi v'yanach n'v'yishim l'chadin Hatzdak v'gimash ilai v'nai v'givai v'yisal v'nubaj l'ben b'resha shenim tzavano shecharvu v'amanu v'nechlam l'chadin Hatzdak v'shnei charbanu shecharvu b'bitzeinu v'anachnu kayomim v'lanu b'osha zaponim v'shveinu ilach v'cholev shadosh v'elim b'rachim l'chadin Hatzdak v'seisha there's a Sham Me'oshana, there's a sinner Givusha Miller Sham Alanabajanu Yizavayish Chamud Zatela Yoznecha Ushema. One of the most dramatic highlights of the Tisha B'Av service is Kinnot Chaf Aleph, page 248, Arzei Halavanoin, depicting the murder of the Asara Haruge Malchus, the 10 martyrs, the 10 great Tanoim who were murdered by the Romans. It's not a precise historical account, because they were not all killed at the same time. Shimon Gamliel, Shmuel Kohen Gadol didn't even live at the same time as the other 8. But the purpose of the Kinnot is to evoke feelings of mourning and feelings of tshuva. On Yom Kippur, we read another piyut about the Asar Rugei Malchus, entitled Eila Ezkara. Because on Yom Kippur, we are trying to achieve forgiveness, atonement. And the Gemara says in Moed Katan, Misas Sadikim Mechaperes, that the death of the righteous brings atonement. Amar Rabbi Ami, Lama Nismecha Misas Miriam Lepara Aduma. What's the juxtaposition of the death of Miriam to Para Aduma? Loi Marlach, Ma Para Aduma Mechaperes, Af Misasan Shel Tzadikim Mechaperes. So that's why we read about it on Yom Kippur. But the question is, why do we read about it on Tisha B'Av? These Tanaim were not murdered at the time of Churban Beis HaMikdash. The answer is, the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, Shkula Misas Tzadikim Kisreifas Beis Elokeinu, that the death of the righteous is equal to the burning of the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore on this day of disaster, when we mourn Churban Beis HaMikdash, we mourn for an equal tragedy. The Kinnot begins, Arzei Halavanoin, cedars of Lebanon. Tzadikim are compared to cedar trees. Like we say, Tzadik Hatamar Yifrach. Adirei HaTorah, giants of Torah. Balei Treisen, the shield bearers, the defenders of the Messiah, the Mishnah of the Gemara. Giborei Koyach, powerful warriors. Amoleha b'tahara, who toil in purity. Learning Torah is different than all of the other intellectual disciplines. All other disciplines are dependent only on intellect. If you're smart, you'll be successful. But when it comes to Torah, it needs amoleha b'tahara. You need siyata d'shmaya. You need amelos. And you need purity. Yirah shamayim. The Kinnot goes on to depict how they brought in Reb Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. And they each begged the executioner, please, please, kill me first so I don't have to bear to see the death of my friend. And the executioner was so overwhelmed, he decided to cast lots. If you look on line number 10, Yadu goyro mi rishain lacherev berura. They cast lots to see who would be put to the sword first. Kinafol goyrol al Rabin Shimon, Pashat Savara Yuvacha Kinigzera Gezera. When the lot fell on Rab Shimon, he stretched out his neck and he cried when the decree was issued. Rab Shimon Gamliel was the Nasi. He was the great-grandson of Hillel. He was a direct descendant of David HaMelech. Says the Mishnah Brura and Siman and Gimel, that when Reb Shimon ben Gamliel was taken out to be killed, he says to Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, my dear brother, why am I being taken out to be killed like a criminal? I am not a sinner. And Rabbi Shmuel replied, maybe one time when you were being doresh barabim, maybe one time your heart felt personal pleasure and kavod, and you benefited improperly from the Torah. And Reb Shimon replied, Achi nichamtani, my brother, you have comforted me. On the bottom line we say, Mizera Aroin, Sha'al b'vakasha, livkois al ben hagvira. The progeny of Aaron, meaning Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, requested to be able to cry over the son of royalty. Not al roisha yunasane al arkubaisav. He took the severed head of Rab Shimon and placed it on his lap. Minoira hatahira, O pure lamp. Some einav al einav, upiv al piv, bi'ahava gemura. He put his eyes on his eyes and his mouth on his mouth in complete love. Onav Yomar, he cried out and he said, Peh hamizgaber ba'Torah, the mouth that strengthened itself in Torah, Pisaim niknasa olav misa mishuna. The Mekainen then relates that they ordered to take Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, and to strip off the skin of his head with a sharp razor. If you look in the Eila Ezkara that we read on Yom Kippur, it speaks about how the daughter of the executioner coveted the beauty of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. And she asked that the skin of his head be flayed off so that she could stuff it and gaze at his beauty. And it struck me that Rabbi Shmuel's gruesome death is very analogous to the death of Yoshiyahu HaMelech. And I saw last night in the Ramah Mipano that Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol was the tikkun for Yoshiyahu HaMelech. Says the Mekainen, Rasha HaPoishet, Eis Higia Limkoim Tfilin Mitzvah Bara. When the wicked man reached the place of Rabbi Shmuel's head, until then, he suffered in silence. He suffered in dignity. But when they were about to extinguish the brilliant mitzvah of tefillin, Tzak Tzaka, he let out a cry. V'nizdazo ilam ve'eretz hispayrara. The world shaked and the earth crumbled. Rabbi Shmuel was able to contain his personal grief, his personal pain. But when he was no longer able to fulfill the precious mitzvah of tefillin, it was too much to bear. The Mekainen then laments the torturous death of Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara in Brachos Samach Aleph Amud Beis tells us that Rabbi Akiva was imprisoned and sentenced to death for teaching Torah Barabim. They took Rabbi Akiva out to be killed at the time of Kriya Shema. I believe the Yerushalmi says it was Yom Kippur. On page 250 on the 9th line. Me'acharov heviyoyes Rabbi Akiva. After they brought Rabbi Akiva, this took place 60 years after the Churban. Rabbi Akiva was already 120 years old. Oiger harim v'toichenon zu bezu b'svara, whose penetrating analysis could uproot mountains. It's interesting that what we're moaning is not only the death of Rabbi Akiva, but the loss of his Torah, the loss of his contribution of Torah Shabbal Peh. V'sarku es b'sarai b'masrek shel barzel hishtabra, and they combed off his flesh with iron combs to break him. Yatzisa nishmasai be'echad, his soul departed as he was saying the word echad of Kriya Shema. And Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim asked him, Rebbe, are you able to say Shema at a time like this? And Rabbi Akiva responded that my whole life I was yearning and striving to fulfill that which the Torah says, V'yahavta eis Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha b'chol nafshecha, that you should love the Ribbon Shloim afilu hu noitel es nafshecha, even when he takes your soul. V'achshav shabal liyadi lo yakaymena, and now that I have the opportunity, I should not fulfill it. Says Chazal, Bas kol amra ashrecha Rabbi Akiva gufcha tahar b'chol minei tahara. A heavenly voice cried out, Rabbi Akiva, you are pure with every form of purity. And the Gemara says in Brachos, the Bas kol came out and said, Ashrecha Rabbi Akiva she'ata mezuman l'chaye olam haba. Kinnot chafal. Arzel v'anoin. Mandi Raja Bali Jason Mission Gemara Gemara Gayach Lavadara Donisham Nishzagavura Inam Kedoishe Aruke Malchus Asara Vialelani Lakia Vieni Negra Sais Bizarki Azak Bimara Chimnasi Saragli Akodesh Nazaratara Tayre Lev Kedoishe Mesa Misa Kamura Yadu Gaira Mirisha Nagara Barura Kinamo Gaira Rabun Shimon Bajan Zavai Vachinik Zagzera Shimon Lazarek Menarka Vinavishnatsura Mizara and Shabbat Shal of Goza Ben Agavira Nata Roy Shainasan Elakubas of an Arataira Samin of Alena Vivabi Biava Gemura Navi Amar Bamiz Gaber Bataira Bizam Niknis Allah Misa Mishuna Makamura
Tivalav Shazor Shavazar Sakhira Kiamoira Yamrolan Shashi Benavoira Roja Boyres again come to us as Varazak Sagam is not Zoilam Yarsis Vaira Mayakravia Serbia Kivo Karim Vidakan Zibizara Zargas Visara Bimasrik Shalbarzalish Dabara Yatsasanish Masay Biachar Vaskol Amra Shrecha Rabbi Akiva Guvaktar Vachomine Tarav and Bava Rabbi Yudak Rabbi Yubishar and Levazara Nerag Ben Shivim Shana Bidei Arura Yoshe Visanis Ayanaki Vachas Vimalachta Lamara Rabbi Chanina Ben Tradio Nachrav Makil Kihila Ispitzion Shara Yoshe Vidarej Zevadara Imai Begifu Abachavle Zamoira, Sori Fitzisu, Ayamukhrachu, Abasaver Torah, Smugin Jalzamer, Nichali, Bajal Yamos Meira, Chosid Rabbi Yesheva, Azaver Aguam Amoira, Straku Vishluchu, Laklavim, Yukmar Bikfura, Yatsasa Baskal Allah. Shayni aklo midar Moshe l'shamra v'achar Rabbi Chutzvus v'yamebra oy v'apoy reach nisra b'avel bivgeva medura tzadik Rav Lozer ben Shamua b'achroina nerakim v'madkira yemerev sham b'zoya zman kiddush v'yikadesh v'yikra cherev shalfu alav lo yinichu v'chayim l'gamra yatzasa nishmasay b'vora lo yim yoytzer v'tzor tzura kahina v'chayin oizu v'nei avla anois b'gara b'skila Sreifa Eric V'chenek Miyuchal L'shara Noisaras Mimeno Yoichlu Aroyo Sefes Zurach Azayat Shegaju Madomer Yarim Akviro Yetimavinem Lo Yismoid Liyasa Meiz Merkam Gosh Lo Eskein Lo Yaakov Moshi Avesar Tzagim Lech Malach Yimar Shom Lo Yimei Lech Lo Yer Nisa V'neilech
Kinnot Chaf Beis Hacharishu Mimeni V'Adabera. Many of the English commentaries say that Kinnot Chaf Hei Mi'itein Roshi Mayim is the first Kinnot recited on Tisha B'Av that speaks about tragedy unrelated to Churban Beis Hamikdash. And in fact, it is true that Kinnot Chaf Hei is the first Kinnot that explicitly mentions other Churbanos. However, Rav Soloveitchik argues rather correctly that in fact it is Kinnot Chaf Beis, this Kinnot, that is the first Kinnot that commemorates tragedy outside of Churban Beis Hamikdash, commemorating the devastation and the massacres of the Kehillos Shum. Kehillos Shum stands for spires, mains, and worms. Shpeira, Magensa, and Varmaiza that were decimated during the first crusade known as Gezeros Tatnu, Gezeros of 1096. Now, if you understand that Kinnot Chaf Beis is actually commemoration and memorializing the devastation of the German communities, there's one particular line that really comes to light. If you take a look on page 258, on the 9th line in the Art Scroll, we say, Miyafli Nazirais, Umiyaroich Nedarim. Now with the devastation of all the Rishonim, all the Balei Tosfos, who will now interpret the intricacies of Nazirus, of Nazirite vows? Who will arrange for us the laws of oaths and annulment? It would seem rather odd that what the Kinnot is lamenting is the loss of being able to explicate and explain and understand the laws of Nedarim and the laws of Nazirus, which are two sets of halachos, which are possibly the most unpractical and not pressing. But in the context of the tragedy of the First Crusade, this line really comes to life. Says Rav Soloveitchik, the intent of the Paitan is to allude to the two Masechtos in Shas that unfortunately we do not have adequate explanation of. Masechta Nazir and Masechta Nedarim. On these two Masechtos, there is no commentary of Rashi. Yes, in the Gemara it says Rashi, but we know it's not from Rashi. And these two Masechtos proved to be two of the most difficult Masechtos in Shas. In fact, we already find, dating back to the times of the Gaonim, then the academies of the Gaonim, they did not learn Masechta Nedarim. It was too difficult to understand. The Mekainen laments the fact that if the massacres of these three communities, Kiloi Shum, by the way, if you look in the old Tanaim, the old Tanaim written before Rav Moshe, it says these Tanaim were arranged according to the enactment of Kehiloi Shum. If these Kehilos had survived, very possibly there would have been another Rishon, another Gadol, one of the Balei Tosfos perhaps, who would have been able to write for us an authoritative commentary on Masechta Nedarim, Masechta Nazir. But the Mekainen laments with the devastation of these two communities. Mi Afli Naziros. Who will now explain to us Masechta Nazir? Until Eliyahu comes, it's almost the Sefer Chasam. Mi Yarech Nedarim. Who will explain to us Masechta Nedarim? This is Kinnot Chaf Beis Hacharishim Mena V'Adabera. Ayavar Alayim Ramazazan V'Shayim L'Chal Shavim Shavim Tzikaz V'Chal V'Chal Edoima Kayoleda Efa Shava Shayim V'Samar Eswa Kani V'Nhima Divrei Shagoy Sayyid Chukiyama Sifti Aladas Yashinit Alashama Orid B'Sichi Ahima Gol Hi Arima Yerich Shavas Masaz V'Arba Simcha Kalpanim Bara Charash Karcha V'Chazak En Gidul Yal-Kalei V'Anacha Yes, sorry, guy. As the Reshucha Sila Birai Hagay is Miftacha B'Sulay Sai B'Achari Nasach Minasicha Barosh Kol Chutza is Navlasan Kasucha Ilalai B'Tapay Nechashav Kitzayin Tivcha Eilila Hazais V'Damasi Halacha Heyaswa Ilai Devuye Tzayni Dachal Arbois Abachil Haram Tzivacha Eililu Shamayim Zaki Adama Areh B'Sicha V'Yahima V'Kol Nehi Arima Arelam Silvitzako Mara Siflay Tamro Heyagdu B'Chavura Kol Kachoy Latzara Kimavkiro Yisaynu Adas V'Zura Alema Kinigzor Gzeira B'Chari Avazam V'Ebro Nesvadu V'Prishas V'Tara L'Kadesh Shem Agadav Ha'Noira V'Isha Sachav Chisu V'Ezra L'Dav V'Yira Tahira V'Likraya V'Dazara V'Leichasu Gavra Gvira Banim Tzira Stefara V'Alazu Gvura Yisayra L'Halayim Rosh V'Likroitz Shadra V'Eleim Ma'idibro Ba'amira L'Zachino L'Gadel Chamad Na'Grivchem Goyla V'Aktara V'Nizki Macham L'Ira Tzvuna Me'in Kral V'Aluma Heard the Sikh V'Yahima V'Kal Nehi Arima Zizkiru Gedolim M'Ktanim L'Kava B'Yava Din Shechin Mo'inim Zakanim, the Shainim V'Rananim Him Ayatchila Nidainim V'Yatzel L'Grazim Azifanim Nergo Aminim Aminim Nesaru B'Darim Ampar Shadainim V'Avis Ashayir Achamanim Neful Alsa Kayinim V'Episu Alavis Albanim Shgar Allah V'Shanim V'Nishchai B'Chalos Zakinim V'Churim Alay Sayla Amunim Him Lachachu Avar Gesaninim Kalai Savusha Shanim Avis Ashayir Zachanim Mutavis V'Cher V'Chidainim Zechazais Kaladas Nevainem Yatacha Mayam Skinim Yasvida Razin Vagunim Shatsala Mayam Azidainim Zechazais Nafshe Gumar B'Sich V'Yahima Nihi Arima Hey Torah, Chigri Sag, V'Spaushi Ba'afarim, Evel Yachid Asilach, U'Misvat Tamrurim, Al Tov Ze Mishai Tayich, U'Verse Machmorim, L'Chai V'Choy V'Layich, V'Mayim Adir, Marchim Ha'arachich, Mi'ashay Adorim, V'Van Rezunayich, Megalim Estoirim, Mi'ikatz Mi'gloz Mi'Yisades V'Horim, Mi'Arkavoyos, Mi'Yizorich, V'Horim, Mi'Afli Naziros, Mi'Arech Nedarim, Mi'Yisadeh Ma'Makayich, V'Adu Ikarim, Mi'Yilchayim Al-Chamtech, V'Yashiv La'Shorim, Machama Abdu V'Naflu Gibayim Ashrei Maskilim Karakia Zayim Nechai Shalem Nacho Yishar Mahima V'Yishoyim V'Shem Alena Yisarim Tibat Ner Rabba Matzirim Chiyoi Neinem Tamos Lois Zedarim Erbayim Mitin Zevarim V'Kim Mitzavim Migalohirim Mimarinim Hashem Hasharim Choshik L'Chavim Amavadarim Amar Zedamiroyam Zazarim Ganem L'Zay Rasa Shas Rabu Azarim Kiloa V'Roa Kiroa L'Gzarim Gazirim Zebuchem Megdilu Amenturim Alei Zazabeg Adon Kol Yisrim Tigay Dama Nishma Gamama Mugarim Mishaydanim Megasurim Al Javei V'Shalunim Umrurim Richama V'Yizam Ba'Dagarima Karna Magdiya V'Arima Arid B'Sichi V'Yahima V'Kol Nehi Arima Kinnot Chaf Gimel V'yesnavi chatasi hishmima. The Kinnot laments the tragic story told in Masechta Gittin, Daf Nun Ches. It's also in Eicha Rabbah, Parsha Aleph, of the son and the daughter of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, who we just spoke about in Kinnot Chaf Aleph. Each one of them was taken captive by a different Roman slave owner. The son of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol was extraordinarily handsome. The daughter was strikingly beautiful. After all, we mentioned earlier, Rabbi Shmuel himself was a very handsome man, to the point where the daughter of the Roman executioner wanted to flay his skin and preserve it. The two slave owners decided that if they were to marry their two respective slaves to each other, their expectation was the union would produce the most beautifully exquisite children and would be able to command a very hefty price on the slave market. So the two masters locked the two of them up in a room. And if you look on the bottom of page 260, the masters waited outside, their hearts as one. It was dark in the room, they could not see each other. And the young pair each cried bitterly through their soul in great fear. Ad boiker bechisem lo hidmima, their cries did not silence till the morning. Ze yisboid bechel uvekir lev yimsa. They mourned, they trembled, their hearts were melting. Nin aroin eich leshivcha yehei noisei. How could a scion of Aaron be wed to a lowly maidservant? And she likewise cried, a daughter of Yocheved, can she be wed to a slave? The Kinnot says, page 262, at the light of dawn, they recognized each other. They intensified their cries, woe my brother, woe my sister. V'nisdabku yachad v'nischabra ad yotzasa nishmasam b'neshima, until their souls left them in the very same breath. Says the Gemara in Gittin, on Daf Nun Ches. Then when Yirmiyah said the words, Al eila ani boichia eini yardamayim, what tragedy was he crying about? He was crying about the tragedy of the son and the daughter of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. At first glance, the placement of this Kinnot seems somewhat strange. Kinnot Chaf Aleph, the Kinnot before this, we already explained, was the first Kinnot that speaks about the destruction of the German communities. One would have expected then that if Kinnot Chaf Aleph speaks about the Crusades, it should be immediately followed by Kinnot Chaf Hei, Mi'itein Roishimayim, the next Kinnot, which explicitly gives you the names of the communities and the dates of the disaster. Why interject the series of Kinnos about the Crusades with the story of the death of Rabbi Shmuel's son and daughter? To expound on the question and compound the question, one could ask, in the context of the rest of the Kinnos, in the context of major national catastrophe, why interrupt with the personal story of a young man and a young woman who suffered not even as a result of the Churban, and who in the scheme of things, this incident did not change the course of Jewish history? They were relatively unknown. Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol had already been murdered. We didn't necessarily have any great hopes for this young man and woman. Why interject the commemoration of national disaster with the story of the individual? Rav Soloveitchik suggests that what we see from here is that in Klal Yisrael we have a very different approach to the individual. We mourn for an individual even if they're not a great leader, not a great Talmid Chacham, and did not play a major role in Klal Yisrael. In light of major catastrophe, one may dismiss this as an unimportant story. What the Mekainen is highlighting is that even though maybe in other nations this would just slide by, it is our responsibility not only to remember national disaster, it is our responsibility to remember the faceless, nameless individual, not to forget all the Yechidim, not to forget the simple Jew. No Yachid is ever overshadowed. To us, every Yachid is considered Kirubai. It's as if 1 million people were murdered. There's an additional pedagogical reason why the Mekoinen is highlighting this individual situation. Because on an emotional level, people don't always respond to national disaster. When people hear the big numbers, when people hear the big story, it's very hard for the mind to digest and to understand. In fact, the Medrash in Parshas Noach recounts that Rabbi Akiva once collected money in Ginzik, and he was making an appeal, and he was trying to stir the emotions of the people. So he began to tell them the horrors of the Mabul, how all mankind was destroyed. And the people were stone-faced. The people were stone-hearted. It didn't make any impact on them. And then Rabbi Akiva told them the personal story of Eov. And they all broke out into tears. And they contributed generously. It is sometimes easier to move a person with an incident of an individual rather than telling them about the death of thousands. Just to conclude, the Rama Mipano, my friend Rav Shlomo Margarefta reminded me about this maybe a month ago. Rama Mipano points out that the son and daughter of Yishmael Kohen Gadol were the tikkun for Amnon and Tamar, who succumbed under similar circumstances. And this heroic act of Mesiras Nefesh, of morality, was the tikkun for what happened earlier in Tanakh with Amnon and Tamar. Kinnot Chav Gimel Vesnavi Chatas Yishmima V'Demasi Halachi Azrima V'Yemzani Harima V'Yimam Yamim Yamima V'Evel Levinichem Chada Chada Mikol Kev Tziri Nivdal Bada V'Evel Vazer Yishmael Kohen Gadol Zechrom Yikoid Povavi Asima V'Yimam Yamim Yamima Yizneshbu V'Shnei Adonim Reim Shreinim Zelum Azeh Choynim Ayizabel Zelum Zaynyanim Ze Amar Mishav Yasiyanim Shavi Zijiv Relavu Shashanim V'Levanim Ziv Glatstein V'Sayar Gigziya V'Yamima V'Yimam Yamim Yamima V'Yaziroi B'Chef L'Hayim Einani Mishvi Yerushalayim V'Yavisi Yavad Yifeinayim Gasham Eshusakbai Yisarayim B'Y Uniz Avagim V'Nachalka B'Ntayim V'Vladais K'moy Kosh V'Shamayim L'Shem Azais Titzan Oznayim V'Zech Azais Esmadayim Avrima v'yahimam yamim yamim Gezimo yazoy shneim yachad V'revzi v'gum B'cheder echad V'adayin v'chasimam ke'echad V'yimoichem v'mar nefesh v'avachan V'ragim b'chiyasam Lo yedmim v'yahimam yamim yamim Ezay yisvay b'chil v'kerlev yimse N'nara nechlish v'yi noise V'higam hi tiyala v'sigra shoyse V'azich v'rech levet tinaze V'gizaz gazar oimer v'yoyse V'zaz yivuash V'rima v'yahimam yamim yamim V'gazaz zagigiro Yachim yachim zagmiro Nizam v'yachim nizcha baru Agazan nishmas v'nashim v'yahimam yamim yamim V'zazgan yamim b'shiyah G'zir v'zayt v'nani v'yichil v'yikad yikaydo v'yah V'inamaz v'sara v'arima V'zich v'yahima V'kal nehi arima Try this year to focus on some of the other kinnois that we haven't seen in past years. Kinnot Chav Daled. Kinnot Chav Daled is the first kinnah that discusses not only the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash itself, but discusses the desecration and violation of the kelim of the Beis HaMikdash, the vessels. On page 264, we say, Al Churban Beis HaMikdash, Kihuras v'Chihudash, over the destruction of the temple that was torn down and trampled upon. Esboi b'chol shana v'shana mispeid chadash. We mourn every year a new morning. To me, this is a very significant line, a new morning. Because in the Rishonim they discuss if there's a difference in halacha between the Avelos of Tisha B'Av and the Avelos of Lo Yaleinu and Avel for a family member. And there are certain differences, because Avelos in general is called Avelos Chadasha. It's for a new tragedy. But Avelos for Churban has the halachic status of Avelos Yeshana, Avelos for an old story. It is more lenient in many regards. However, the Mekoinen is mentioning that in our hearts, we don't treat it more leniently. In our hearts, Esbod b'chol shana v'shana mispeid chadash. We treat it as if it's Avelos Chadasha, as if it's a new morning. And the question is, why is this point being brought out specifically in this Kinnot, that we treat Churban Beis HaMikdash as Avelos Chadasha? So we'll try to bring out a very, very important point, a very fundamental point about the concept of the Beis HaMikdash. Now, the secret of the Beis HaMikdash, if you want to understand what the Beis HaMikdash is, what the Mishkan is, there's a very concise work that many are not aware was written and attributed to the Rambam. The name of this work is called Pirkei HaHatzlacha. And this idea is found in the Kuzari as well, that they both offer the following idea, that the Mishkan is a model, is a representation of the Guf HaAdam, of a man, and the various appurtenances of the Mishkan represent the various limbs of man. This idea is further elaborated on by Rabbi Shiur Heller, one of the great Gedolim, one of the Achronim, a Talmud of Chaim Volozhiner. Says Rabbi Shiur Heller, and he explains this at great length, just like the Mishkan could be broken up into three main parts. You have the holiest is the Kodesh HaKadoshim, where you have the Aron and the Kruvim, followed by the Kodesh, where you have the Menorah, the Shulchan, and the Mizbeach HaKtoras. And then after that you have the Chatzar with the Mizbeach HaOila. Says Rabbi Shiur Heller, these three areas represent the three areas of the face of an Adam. The forehead, which encases the brain, is the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Below the forehead are the eyes and the nose, slightly lower, that is the Kodesh. And the mouth is the Chatzar. Says Rabbi Shiur Heller, the Kodesh HaKadoshim symbolizes the forehead and the brain. That is why, where does Aaron HaKoyen wear the tzitz that says Kodesh Lashem on the forehead? The forehead is the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. Says the Zohar HaKadosh and the Idra Rabbah and the Idra Zuta, that is why the human brain has three compartments, corresponding to Chachma, Bina, Vadas, because it represents the Kruvim and the Aron, the three parts of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The mind is the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Kodesh HaKadoshim, in fact, then, is only a model, is only a mashal to the holiness of the mind. Says Rabbi Shiur Heller, what a frightening thought. One's mind is even holier than the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which means how careful we have to be to keep our thoughts pure. Says Rabbi Shiur Heller, Ma'oyoim ha'machazeh hazeh al zois yecherad leiv ha'adam. Because by allowing an impure thought to enter your mind, says Rabbi Shiur Heller, it's like bringing a zoina into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's the first part of the forehead, the first part of the face. The next part of the face, says Rabbi Shiur Heller, are the two eyes, which are directly opposite each other, and a little further down the nose. The two eyes represent the menorah in the south and the shulchan in the north. The nose, of course, represents the Mizbeach HaKetoras, Yasimu Ketara Bi'apecha. Just like the nose is not directly in between your two eyes, the Gemara says the Mizbeach HaKetoras must be a little bit further down. And the Gemara in Yuman Lamed Gimel Beis uses the following lashon: the Mizbeach HaKetoras must be Mashuch Klape Chutz Kima. The Mizbeach HaKetoras cannot interfere between the menorah and the shulchan. Why? Dibayinan dechazu ahadadi. They need to look at each other. Another remez to the fact that the menorah and the shulchan were like the two eyes. Therefore, says Rabbi Shiur Heller, how careful we have to be what we allow our eyes to see. The eyes are the menorah hatahira. The eyes are the Shulchan HaTahira. And then finally, the last part of the human face is the mouth, which represents the Mizbeach HaOilah in the Chatzar. The Gemara in Chulin says on that Pei Aleph Amud Beis, Karbanos are called Achilas HaMizbeach. Says Rabbi Shua Heller that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave me an earth-shattering discovery. That if you count up all the various vessels of the Mishkan, the 48 Kroshim, and the 100 Adonim, and the 100 Lulais, and the 50 Krosim, and the 11 Yiriyas Izim, and the 96 Tabois, and the Amudim, and the Vavim, and the Masach, and the 5 Amudim, and the Kior, and the Mizbeach HaChatas, and the Mizbeach HaOilah, and the Kaporos, and the Kruvim, the Rebbeinu Shalom gave me a matana. There are 613 details of the Mishkan, of the Mikdash, corresponding perfectly with the 248 limbs of an Adam and 365 sinews. Says Rabbi Shua Heller, what is the Mishkan? What is the Mikdash? It is you. And that is why it occupies more space than any other topic in the entire Torah. Because the most important thing in the eyes of Hashem is you and your Kedusha. And in light of this concept then, that the Mikdash and the appurtenances of the Mikdash represent our different halakim, what then does it mean for us if the Mikdash is b'chorbana? If the Mikdash has been destroyed? If the Mikdash is a mashal to our state, what does it mean for our state? What does it say about us if the Mikdash is b'chorbana? Then it signifies that we too are b'chorbana, that we have been desolated, we have been violated. Our respective level to what was is also b'chorbana. And in that case, as every year passes, and mankind descends lower and lower into darkness, into immorality, then the Churban Beis HaMikdash has to be more acute to us every year. Because look at us today. Our personal Churban is more felt and more acute than ever. And that perhaps is why it is specifically in this Kinnot that the Mekainen emphasizes Esbid b'chol shana v'shana misbeid chadash. That since this is the Kinnot that talks about the appurtenances of the Mishkan, which represent us, that is what allows us to feel more deeply and more acutely the Churban in a more personal way. Kinnot Chaf Gimel. Kinnot Chaf Daled. Churban Beis HaMikdash Yirez L'Yudah B'chol Shana V'Shana Misbeid Chadash. Halem der Jesus mir wenn gesagt da über mich heran gerade ich bin nicht da rein stimmt ich doch schon mal auf mal da am se ما بقول ما تمنام تاخذ سبب يا بيتا رشيا بعدين كينك نسبة بين عبارة خلاص يا ما خلاص أبى مثال تايم لا خلاص قديش قديش بس قديش ينودا ساعات لا تعالي جدا بنام تاخذ كم كم شاني دا بيان بعد غاق إننا بيان سام غاق لا يخمنا ربي صاحب سام خاطر ونام وصار بني أجيد يا زبالة وقاش ما قاش بالله يا خين ويا زي شبر كنا بالله بزرگ خانه شلون لارخیم نمیاد نیما سرشن رقیشم که آن خلا اسرافیم آیم نامی ماما کنار سماخین از میدرد مقامر و زیدم کاری میاش من خواهی زیام از رگی ایراز کنار سال بهوینم شبور ازش نیامار از میاز که دور از مازای بانم شب مرکام کورا دلار از رگی گاوا قدش آگایم نگروم ما لا يعزم مهران ما يسراد أدلم البرق لا يراد أنا شما ما بما سياب داد كاكل أساس وغلا يزا كاكس كتسات بشوز من بيت الله بتسيس هذا جلاه إسرائيل يوم جنكم ما مربوبا لا قسم الله ويشم تين بيغا ديم ما زمان الله بيغا تزوا ما ما ياب ما يزوا قربا وقبل ما يوزم نزاب من الخال قويم بيزين غرب مغيال زربيا قيدش
Love me do laza, ve'ela dir jmoila yavazi laza, legalim guzam bezvi laza, zamarija chagachashu minaya, v'na malacham toyin hayem jam, matigala salamela v'shas azam, aganim alaviyam, hamish moizim nishchatim, ma'viyam hachlagaisam jadas, istarti yoidim, v'namayim melagazim baradim, akim v'hamisham hashem, hashvi alchem, Azav azagan magam mishulchem, v'sumor badim, sagachagru malachem, dotzlavim, v'gachinov, Hine michal malach, levanav shamralchem, avodim chasam moina. Kavadam chimam menoira, v'natu yado yalil, amoyim v'yachas agor, oitoira, b'shagayin, arim v'birbil, Arado dicha, mes mesavem, v'kan ruchas v'malalakim v'lamar, amrin lamashchisam v'masitach, v'yasidis nashim chavay v'anasad, yazam v'fisnach lozinot tashdi.
Kinnot Chafei, Miyite Noishi Mayim, V'yeni Mikor Noizai, V'yevka Goyim Moizai, V'leila Yozalei Tabai, V'leila V'shesheke Ola, V'yatemanu Avoy, Oy V'ala Levchem, B'choy B'charav Erev, V'yizah V'yala Madinu Yinavu B'chorev. V'dama Yatid Ma'eni, V'yel Choli Sudei Voichem, V'yavake Imi Morei Levav Anevoichem, Abasulois hayafois viladim arakim v'zivreim nichrachim l'tavach nimshachim admu etzem ebninim zapir v'noivrim g'may tirchutzos nidashim nishlachim suruta me'karu l'maymi l'karev al beis Yisrael v'alamadayno kinaflu b'charev v'seirat einidim av'elila v'yanuda v'levchi v'lachagar sak ekra l'asbida mipazi kara v'zav chamuda Pinima kivuda kvay kol kli chemda Rizia gerua shchulavi gamuda Torah mikro v'mishnah v'agada Anu v'koinenu zois la'agida Eisoira talmid v'aloimda Haloy amokar mein yoshev charev Al beis Yisrael v'al amadayno kinaflu b'charav V'afapa yizu ma'im dema le'agira Ma'koinen mara le'arugei ashpira B'asheni v'shmoin avoy B'yay margaya ukra, miragaya nechlafu la'avira, nergo b'achrei chemed, b'sheishei adar nesu yacha, nafsha mishlimu, b'mayra yichud shema, michad yichadu shemik, v'rogibarichaya chesed var l'mahara, b'choya nai v'hulamai, nigvu kolem, asara, v'maya goyni, v'yatzvi ala l'achvira, Kihiloi sa'koidesh, arigosam ayom ki b'zachra, kalvar maiza v'chunu v'chura, goyni ereznukei Torah. Pamayim kitchu shem amichad b'moira b'esrim shloisha b'chodesh zivla taro v'chodesh hashlishi b'kriyas halel l'shoyra shlimu nafshem b'yavo kishra ima aleihem b'vchiyela l'chashra kilulei chesa roisham liatra v'yaladire kamagen sahadura min asharim kalumei rois liz gabra yishlimu nafshem al yichud shem anoiv aleim zaka shever eshar al shnei mikdashai yisodim v'ayam orara Gal chorvo ismad mikdashai midrashei atayra v'chodesh Shlishi, Vashlishi noisav l'davoinu meira, Chodesh hashanepach liyogoin v'tzara, V'yoim matan dasi barti l'zashra, V'yoim nesinaza, K'moichein os chazra, Solo l'amorem l'mkoim medaira, Teikov v'nateikav adorsha v'choikra, Loim de'al v'shan abishan k'moi v'oira, Simon alavchem, Espein mar l'kasher, Yishkula rigosam, L'sabel u'l'sapra, Kisrei fast base Eloheina ha'ulam v'habira v'chiein lahoisef moyed shever v'savera v'yein lahaktim zulasi liachra tachas kein ayam livlasi a'irei ravi asfada v'elila v'yevke v'never shmora v'yanchazi gavdam v'boikem v'yad erev beis Yisrael elam adoinoi yinaflu b'charav v'yaleilani v'oichiav libinoyim nehimois v'yekra lamakonos v'yalachachamois eli v'yolyo kulamoimois Hayesh machav l'machavi l'dam zichus t'shagacher mechadorem emos chalalai chalalei mutolim arum v'arumos nivlosam kesucha l'chaya saretz v'lab emos yonekim mish seva alamim ba'alamos misatim b'moimoin ayom arbim kilimois ey Elohim ayom rutzor chasoyu v'yad mois yav v'yoshia v'yachazer neshames chasen ya micha moicha noisei alumos
Techeshav Sasabak Vosachar Chimoz Ramar Lai Maligai Im Elohimu Yaref Al Beis Yisrael V'Alam Adonai Ki Naflu Becharav Eini Yardamayim Ki Nebach Level Meshoyer V'Ugavi L'Kol Boichim Milahafig L'Karer Miyonad Li Miyachazik L'Soyer Chim V'Yotzu V'Sar V'Zgor Achalani Hamamanai Hatzar Hatzar Shibar Hatzmoy Zayzora Umefara Sil Chalabirai Hatar V'Ashar Heretio Mazar Ein Levara Makasi Anusha V'En Masilu Mizoyer Al Kino Martishu Meni Amore V'Vchidim Asi Alachi L'Tzaref Al Beis Yisrael V'Alam Adonai Ki Naflu Becharev Kino Chavav Az Valach Yirmiyo Al Kivrei Avos V'Namat Samois Chavivois Ma'atem Sheichos V'Nechem Golu V'Oteyem Charevos V'Ayez Chosavos V'Yarz Taluvos Go Kulam Mekinim Achezrain Bonim Davilu V'Kol Dachanunim B'nei Shoichein Ma'oinim V'Ayev Tachez V'Zachadilam B'Ritz Rishaynim Himemiro Gavoida B'Sayo V'Vachadu V'Layro V'Alemeina Me'em Lo Yishav V'Loino V'Ches Abba Galamiras Lo Yuzak Avamoin Ba'avuram V'Chinem Pnei Avram Chinam Nuseisi Eser B'Chinois Avuram V'Hein Chazisi Shivram V'Yaye Avtochas Al Tira Avram Tolahoirois Lavoidois Orois Yatzulachzoi Boros Boros Nishboros V'Ches Abba Gabitul Aser Sadibrois Koit Zavar Yitzchok V'nei Shechin Shachak Lasha B'Tevach Chukak V'en Zayin Nishchak V'nimchai V'Yayev Tochazes B'Siyokim Es Yitzchak Maru B'Yirmiyah V'Timu Har HaMoiriya Nelesi Nesai Ga'aya Ilalim Minashiyah V'Ches Abba Galarigas Zecharya Sach Yulad V'Selev Demois Kisanin Zoylef Oila Lai Asher Tibachti Be'elef V'Gazu Meni V'Chelev V'Chufra Meni Damim Damim Kamo Elef Potz Roya Ne'emon Kafush Befer Umudman Sain Asher B'Cheki Hu Amon Ech Gazu B'Loizman V'Ayav Tachas Kiloi Almon Koil B'Chileya Misoy Fefes Alevaveh Rochel Achoysa Mevaka Boneha V'Zilpa Makafoneh Bila Mikoynenes V'Shtei Yodeh Shuv V'Samimim Limnu Chaschem Malei Amalei Komish Aloi Seichem Shulachta Bavel Manchem Hineni Mishoyvev Golos B'Neichem Kinnot Chavches Echte Nachamuni Hevel V'Chinori Nepach Liyevel Menach Laschevel Kavan Eloi Oed Sevel V'Echenochem B'Zayim V'Chol Shani Dan Olai Shina Hineni Aguma V'Aguno Yosmei Lav Shana V'Echenochem Gavar Choroin V'Nignaz Oroin B'Mishna Shibarim B'Misarvei Morin V'Echenochem Dirasi Chareva V'Edri Nishba V'Rabas Haliva Badad Yashva V'Echenochem Hu Al Aryeh Misu B'Chai Al Ariel V'Hizbichai V'Egla Misukai Menchasai V'Nizgai V'Echenochem Varagamonim V'Shuchei Shmonim V'Voinim Nem Perchei Chayanim Halofim Shmonim V'Echenochem Zinavam Kechivi V'Idbi V'Ezras Hamalbi Aryech K'Moilavi Adam Koimenovi V'Echenochem Charash Mashois Ermelei Atushois Batei Seifrim Mishnayos Esmi Abramias V'Echenochem Tazamad Eli Abid Chamudai Umashla V'Machamate V'Karimate V'Echenochem Yotzal Chanek V'nei Gor Mezanek V'Echad L'Shanek Zakin V'Yashis Oilo V'Yoinek V'Echenochem Kadosh Lishis HaKadosh Reishis V'Shatzav Charishis V'Asal Hashis V'Echenochem L'Chatzal Chalek V'Chalek V'Chalek She'en Lachem Chalek V'Shemesh Toilek V'Echenochem Arda Edoim Adushas Adam V'Yatzav V'Zadin L'Abed Kes V'Adoim V'Echenochem Noyadu Im Admoin Moya V'Amoin L'Hashbis Amoin L'Haklev V'Amoin V'Echenochem Silo Chol Abirai V'Edrei Chavirai V'Vlagu Giboira L'In Kol Oivrai V'Echenochem Oiva Navshu L'Hargim L'Misvar Harugim Kayal Hargim Alacha Neharagim V'Echenochem B'Latzu B'Yam Karavim Mizrach V'Marav Al Dom Moirav Gol V'Yamra V'Echenochem Tzar Sal Tzaris Zumi Tzira Zilos V'Zorugas Logos V'Echenochem Kashrut Sinasam V'Chagru Chanizam V'Asum Achanois V'Erichel Amanis V'Echenochem Rabbi Sanchois V'Atzmo V'Atzumois Kinois Rabbanam Mois V'Yatadin Mosai V'Echenochem Shomat Cherbasim Chervoni B'Svasam Shiftam V'Kimas V'Ani Manginas V'Echenochem Tegvaschem Eivoy Malachem Paichora V'Vein Oidler V'Echenochem Shuvoi Seichem Nisharo Ma'al Hainuni Oivdei Abad Yashkif Mima Moirid Shel V'Yohav V'Echenochem. We go to Kinnot Lamed Aleph that we all recite together. Eish tu kad bekirbi v'haloisi alibi v'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim kinim oira liman askira v'tzeisi mirushalayim az yashir Moshe shir lo yinashe v'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim v'yikoinen Yirmiyah v'nanahi niyah v'tzeisi mirushalayim Beisi hiskainan v'shachan he'anan v'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim v'chamas el shachna olai kanana v'tzeisi mirushalayim Galeyam ramu v'chachayma kamu v'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Zidunim shatafu v'yaroi shitafu b'tzeisi mirushalayim Digan shamayim mitzor yazuvu mayim b'tzeisi mitzrayim Lana umroirim umayim hamorim b'tzeisi mirushalayim Hashkem v'harev s'vivois ha'choirev b'tzeisi mitzrayim Koirei elevel al narois bavel b'tzeisi mirushalayim Umarek void adoinoi ke'eshoy cheles lefanoi b'tzeisi mitzrayim V'cherev l'tusha l'tavach netusha b'tzeisi mirushalayim Zevach u'mincha v'shemen hamishcha b'tzeisi mitzrayim Segulas elekucha kitzayin letivcha b'tzeisi mirushalayim Chagim v'shabbasois u'moifsim v'yoisois b'tzeisi mitzrayim Tanis v'yevel u'redof ha'hevel b'tzeisi mirushalayim Toivu ayhalim li'arba digalim b'tzeisi mitzrayim B'yalei yishme'elim u'machanois areilim b'tzeisi mirushalayim Yoivel u'shmita v'yeretz shoyketa b'tzeisi mitzrayim Machar letzmitzos v'charos v'chasos b'tzeisi mirushalayim Kapoires v'aroin v'avnei zikaroin b'tzeisi mitzrayim Noiksim u'moinim u'moichrim v'koinim b'tzeisi mirushalayim Moshe yireinu b'tzeisi mitzrayim Noiksim u'moinim u'moichrim v'koinim b'tzeisi mirushalayim Moshe yireinu v'aron yancheinu b'tzeisi mitzrayim Nebuchadnezzar v'adaryonos Kesar b'tzeisi mirushalayim Narach milchama v'adoinai shama b'tzeisi mitzrayim Rachak mimenu v'hinei einenu b'tzeisi mirushalayim Sisrei faroiches v'sidrei ma'areches b'tzeisi mitzrayim Chema niteches v'yalai seicheches b'tzeisi mirushalayim Oila uzvachim v'yishei nichaychim b'tzeisi mitzrayim V'cherev midukarim v'netzion hayikarim b'tzeisi mirushalayim Parei migbais l'chavoi nigbais b'tzeisi mitzrayim Shrikais usruais v'koilais uzvais b'tzeisi mirushalayim Tzitz hazahav v'hamshel v'rahav b'tzeisi mitzrayim Ushlach hanezer v'yafas ha'ezer b'tzeisi mirushalayim Kedusha u'nevuah uchvayid Adonai nira b'tzeisi mitzrayim Nigala u'mayra v'ruach hatuma b'tzeisi mirushalayim Rina v'yishua v'chatzois rois hatrua b'tzeisi mitzrayim Zakas oila v'nakas chala b'tzeisi mirushalayim
Yerushalayim Shulchan Menorah V'Chalil Uktaira Teisi Mitzrayim Elel V'Soyeva Ufesel U'Matzeva V'Teisi Yerushalayim Tairo Suda Uchlei Hachemda Teisi Mitzrayim Sasain V'Simcha V'Nas Yagain Ma'anacha V'Shuvi Yerushalayim. Kinnot Lamed Vav. The Kinnot begins the last group of Kinnos, which is called the Tzion Kinnos. The last 10 of Kinnos all begin with the word Tzion, except for one. And the main theme of these last Kinnos is the idea that Eretz Yisrael, that Tzion, is the center of the world and the chosen land of the Ribono Shel Olam. Kinnot Lamed Vav was written by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, one of the greatest of all the Paitanim. Says the Rashba and the Tshuvas HaRashba, Tshuvah Taf Yud Ches, that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is the greatest of all the Paitanim in merit and in distinction. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was born in Toledo in the year 1080. He's a Talmud of the Rif, a Talmud of the Rimagash. But aside from studying the Talmud, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was a master of literary style in Hebrew and in Arabic. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was literally in love with the land of Israel. After all, isn't he the one who wrote the famous words, Libi ba'mizrach, V'ani b'soif marav. My heart is in the east, while I am stranded in the farthest end of the west. While there have been many pilgrims to the land of Israel, no one has quite expressed the love of the land as passionately as Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. The Rambam, for example, in the entire Moreh Nevuchim only mentions Eretz Yisrael one time. Rabbeinu Bachya in the Chovos HaLevavos does not mention Eretz Yisrael even once. Even the Ramban, a great lover of Eretz Yisrael, only mentions Eretz Yisrael in a halachic sense. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, however, expressed his passion and love for Eretz Yisrael in a very poetic and literary style. On the bottom line, on page 328, says Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, Miyasa li knafayim, v'archik nedoid. Who shall make me wings, so that I might wander far away? Onid levisrei levavi. I would cause my shattered heart to wander amidst bein b'sayroyach, among your ruins. What does Rabbi Yehuda Halevi mean when he says, who shall make me wings? Why would he want wings? What good would that do? Just to fly through Eretz Yisrael. I believe Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is echoing the words of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Medrash tells us in Devarim Rabbah, Parsha Yud Aleph, that when Hashem takes Moshe Rabbeinu up to the mountain, he says, look, you could see Eretz Yisrael, but you cannot enter. Moshe Rabbeinu says, if I can't enter as is, allow me to transform into a behema, into a chaya, into an animal, and eat the grass and drink the water of Eretz Yisrael. The Ribono Shel Olam said, Rav Lach, don't ask. Then Moshe Rabbeinu asked, V'im lav, hanach oisi ba'olam hazeh ka'oif. At least make me like a bird, so I could fly through Eretz Yisrael. Asks Rav Moshe Feinstein in the Darash Moshe, but doesn't the Gemara in Saita say on Daf Yudalid that the only reason Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael was to fulfill the mitzvahs hatzuliyos ba'aretz? If he goes in as a bird, he won't be able to mekayim any of the mitzvahs. Not Truma, not Shemitah, not Meiser, not even Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. What benefit, asks Rav Moshe, is it to fly through Eretz Yisrael? Says Rav Moshe, we see from here the great spiritual benefit of just being there, breathing in the air, even without the opportunity to fulfill mitzvahs. What is the benefit of being in Eretz Yisrael? Says Rabbi Yehuda Halevi on page 330. Says Rabbi Yehuda Halevi on the second line, Epoil la'api alei artzech. I would fall with my nose onto your earth. V'ertze avonayich lemoid. I would desire greatly your stones. I would cherish your stones. V'achoynein es afeiroyach. And favor your dust. Even the stones of Eretz Yisrael are endowed with desirable qualities. Like Chazal say, Rabbi Abba's custom was to kiss the stones of Eretz Yisrael. In this week's Parsha, Parshas Va'eschanan, Moshe Rabbeinu is mispalel, Ebra na. Please let me pass through. Says the Paneach Raza. Moshe Rabbeinu was being mispalel na. Na is Begematria 51. The Yarden is 50 amos wide. Moshe Rabbeinu was mispalel, please let me just go, na, 51 amos in. Just go 1 amma into Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbeinu Shalom did not allow him. The question is, what gives the dirt of Eretz Yisrael Kedusha? Even the dust, even the dirt is endowed with Kedusha. Says Rabbi Yehuda Halevi on the 4th line. The reason is, Af ki ba'amdi ale kivrois avoisai. Even as I stand by the graves of my patriarchs. Ve'eshtoimim ale chevroin, mivchar k'vayroyach. I behold in wonderment the choicest burial spots. Har ha'avorim, har ha'har, asher sham shnei oirim gedolim oirayach u'moirayach. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is introducing the principle that what endows the dust and the dirt of Eretz Yisrael with Kedusha is the fact that in Eretz Yisrael are the Kivrei Avos and all the tzaddikim who are buried there. We likewise find this principle in Sefer Nehemiah. In Nehemiah Perek Beis, when Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim lay desolate, and Nehemiah came before the king of Paras and he begged to be able to return and restore the land. His argument was, why can I not return? Ha'ir beis kvaros avoisai chareva. The city of the place of my forefathers' graves lie in ruins. He wasn't asking to rebuild because it was the Makom HaMikdash. He was asking to rebuild because it was Makom Kivros Avoisai. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi then pens perhaps his most stirring words. Says Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, Chaye neshamois avir artzech. A breath of life for the soul is the air of your land. Merely breathing in the air of Eretz Yisrael invigorates the soul with life, giving new spiritual capabilities to the neshama. In fact, the great Makubal, the grandfather of the Chidah, Rabbi Avram Azulai, in the Sefer Chesed Avram, he writes, why is the air of Eretz Yisrael called Avira? Avira Da'ara. In Shas, it's called Avira Da'ara. The word Avir is a compound word, says Rabbi Avram Azulai. Oyer Hashem. Oyer Hey. It's the light of Hashem. When one brings in the air of Eretz Yisrael into their system, it illuminates every cell of their body. And that is why Chazal say, Avira Da'ara Machkim. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's greatest contribution to the world of literature, of Torah literature, was of course his great work, the Kuzari. The Kuzari describes the quest of the king of the Khazars to try to determine the true religion. So he brought in a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jewish scholar. The king was finally convinced of the truth and authenticity of Judaism, but he had only one problem. He said to the Jewish scholar that if your religion is true, then why do so many Jews pay mere lip service to Tzion? Yes, they daven 3 times a day. Hamachazer shchinasei l'Tzion, v'Yerushalayim ircha. But says the king of the Khazars, Aval dibureinu ela kitziftzuf hazarzir. It's like the chattering of a bird. Nobody really means it. She'ein anachnu choshvim mamash shenoimar. We don't even think about what we're saying. And the Kuzari took these words to heart. And the Kuzari offered the following promise. Says the Kuzari, Im hayinu mizamnin atzmeinu l'kras elokei avoseinu. If we would return to Eretz Yisrael and prepare ourselves, b'leivav sholem uvenefesh chafetza, hayinu poigim mimenu mashapagu avoseinu b'Mitzrayim. The Rebbeinu Shalom would redeem us like He redeemed us from Mitzrayim. The author of Kuzari took his words to heart, and he set out to the land that his heart yearned for. Upon reaching Damascus while facing Tzion, legend has it that he recited this Kinnot. Many historians believe that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi never made it to Eretz Yisrael, but there is a tradition cited in Shalshalas HaKabbalah by Rav Gedalia ibn Yachya that indeed Rabbi Yehuda Halevi reached Yerushalayim, where he fell to the ground, reciting the pasuk, Kiratzu avodecha es avoneha, and while kissing the dust, he was trampled and killed by an Arab horseman. Kinnot Lamed Vav, Tzion Halaisa Shali. Tzion Halaisa Shali L'Shalom Asiroyach. Tarsher Samech Leim Yasaderach. Yom HaMizach Mitzafan V'Seiman. Shalom Rachai B'Karab Sini Kol HaVaroyach. Shalom Asir Tikva. Noisein Demav Ketal Chermai V'Nosaf L'Ritam Al HaRayach. L'Kois Anusech Ani Sanim. Esech Aloim Shiva Shavusech. Ani Chinar L'Shirayach. Libi Levesel V'Lefnei El Ma'od Yehemel Machanayim V'Chonegei Toyrayach. Shamash China Shchunalach Yoitzrich Pasach Lamos Shari Shachak Sharayach Chwed Adinei Levad Hoya Ma'oyrech V'yin Sar V'Shamash V'Choycha V'Ma'oyrayach Evchar L'Nafshi L'Shtapech L'Mkoyma Sharuach Alayim Shfucha Al B'Chirayach Ad Beis Melucha V'Yad Kisei Chavoideo V'Yich Yoshua Avodim Alei Chisois Gavirayach Miyaneni Meshoited L'Mkoyma Sasha Niglu Alayim L'Chayzach V'Tzirayach V'Yas Alichin Afayim V'Yachik Nedaid Anir levisrei levavi bein mesarayach. Epol la'api ale artzech v'yartzev aneh kumloi v'chanin asaparayach. Habki v'amdi ale kiroi savo yisai v'shtemim ale chaber nivchak v'arayach. Har ha'avarim v'hara hara asher sham shnei oirim gedoyim oirayach v'oirayach. Chayin neshamai savir artzech v'marduar avkas afarech v'noifes sufn harayach. Yinam l'nafshi olech orim v'yachev ale charvei shemama asher hoyad v'irayach. Mkoim Aronech Hashanignas Mkoim Kruvayach Shashachnu Chadrei Chadarayach Ego Ogois Vashach Be'er Nezer Ve'ekaiv Zaman Chilel Be'er Tzbeldo Ves Nezirayach Echi Arav Li'acho V'shasois Be'isech Hazeh Ki Yischavu HaKlovim Es Kefirayach Hayech Ma'or Yoim Mihi Masak Le'inai Ba'id Era V'fi Arvim Pigrei B'Sorayach He says, Garahala Eshtech Hamarich, Yes Garahaliva, Yamteh Shamarayach, Tzion Kluas, Yoifi, Ahava, V'chein, Oiruri Lamai, Ubachnik Shuru, Nafshes, Chavirayach, Him, Hasamechem, Lashavasich, V'koya V'mash, Asherim Leisech, V'echmash Varayach, Hibar Shvishayach, V'negdech, V'mishtach, V'mishnum, Kayamai, L'nech Sharayach, Edri Amoinech Asher Golov, Nespaz Me'ale Givov, Loishachu Gedei Rayach, Amachazikim, V'shulayach, Mezamzim Lalois, Lachos, V'sansine, Semarayach, Shinor Ufasers Hayarchucha, V'godlam, V'memlam, V'dam, V'smech, V'rechel, V'yidam, V'meshechayach, V'mi'inaviach, V'mi'laviyach, V'shirayach, Yishan V'yachalev, Gologam, V'chazalim, V'chasech, V'adam, V'dam, Nizirach, V'lamoshe, V'loyach, V'ashayano, Jivcha, V'yikar, V'yishkanach, Etzera, Ashrei Mechake, V'yagia, V'yira, Eloi, Soile, Oirech, V'yibak, Olech, Shechoyrayach, L'rois V'toivas B'chirayach, L'alois B'simchasech, V'shuvech Elei, Kadmos Ne'arayach. Kinnot Memalef, Shali, Srufa V'esh, L'shleim Avilayach, Amasavim Shechoin, Naradaz V'layach, Ashrevim Avarez, Agayevim Amishtoimim, Alei Moiken Galilayach, Halchem, Rashechem in Noiga, V'gavim Lor Yom, Asher Yizach Aleim, V'alayach, L'shleim Enosh, Menach Moicha B'leiv Nishbar, Tamim Gan Alei Tzir Avalayach, V'yizayin Gizan V'nois Yana, V'yikom Esleim Mar B'glalayach, Egon Usun Amish, Nechla Dukamish, Masar V'lei Nechuzar, Megach Alayach, Aron Adina Dijach, Nabroi Vashkeid V'nei V'rachai, Alei Chizach Arulayach, Deju Rov Gavel, L'shpoi B'nei Yeo, V'chol Amish Batim, V'samli V'flilayach, Oy Tigzar, L'shpoi V'dasesh V'chukim, L'chein Ashrei Sheyishalem L'chkim Ulayach, Tzor B'lapid V'esh, Alevav, V'rzana Zanegim V'acharizech, Atalayidesh V'shulayach, Sinai Al-Kain, V'abacher L'yim, V'azudai, L'mazach B'gvulayach, L'yaysim L'yveis L'das, Kisses my Visser, make a void of Venom, Sham Shalaya, Marshal Nahasham, Mish, David Noit, Savasha, Yigba, Kanat, Bimilayach, tells me all this gas, in I Bushak Lasat, Adel Busham, and Hostachel of Shimalayach, I read the voice of the Yochanacha, Gilligish, Nesare, Atzilayach, Mishran, Maravesh, Ishtar, Hadash, Vakinis, Gililayach, Hoidesh, Lishi, Hokshar, Haravi, Lashkis, Kamdazev, Hoyofi, Klilayach, God Alleluchos V'Shinam V'Val Telisef V'Ishtos Hazazashim Kvelayach Esmal Nafshech Yarav L'Chikiyacha Achari Rois Yasher Osvu Shalayach Al-Toiv Chayva Kinidar Zarvu Shalal Yoyin Ashetim Hasavik Alayach Lo Yedalim Tzedach Sululach Yoyu Avelos Nisav Yoshim V'Silayach Im Zagvi Midvash Unzach V'Mash Kademois L'Rago Yayus Kavel Kivalayach Yarav L'Einai Sha'oiv Meim
Meimei demai adei chalo chamalza v'chnav me'ilayach ach yachriv v'beritam alachoyoi avar kinech merachamai l'ndoi ba'alayach lakach tzvar kasa l'avadach l'meirachavimai alaynot sotzol alayach v'ani gishach v'gamot Hanishad Ivan Mayam Guzan Roy Zahar Migdoi Layach Layach Lakal Zahar Mizar Zalek Inid Gilchavle Supech Alilayach Elbash Ve'eskas Besak Kilim Moed Yakruot Smukachal Yerbi Yonav Shizchal Alayach Esma Moed Alma Or Hayoim Haja Yizachal Galabo Yacha Shavelai Ve'elayach Zagi Bekol Marletz Rao Shivroinech Bial Choyech V'lu Yizkar Avas Klulayach Chibil Versak Alei Hahavora Shoyotza Lechalek V'sofsas Klulayach Kimei Anu Sech Yenachem Eitzor V'yashiv Shoshiv Te'yishun V'yarm Eshvalayach Oy Tadi Vadi Shani V'soif Tikli Telchi V'mach V'tzali V'mchaylayach Yorm Levavi V'yitzrech L'Orlach V'yagia L'chashkech V'yayiru Afiloyech
Who's off? I'm going to say the... Which one do you usually say?
Which one?
Which one do you usually say? From the Baba Rebbe? So we're going to say Kinnot on page 384. Reb Shmuel Lippman is going to lead us in the Kinnot commemorating the Shoah.
זכרנו וקוננו כל ישראל כולכם ישומע ברומו גשמי לגרמניה זמנו מדם המלחמה ומיזוז משונויס אכזרויות ברוב צומו אל תשכחו בכל הדורויס אל תזכו לאויס בנחמה צעקו סמריוסם ספופם מסקורם בקוינם קצוי לטבח יבולו לשרפו בכבשונים כל שבום יזוכר תמיד לפני שוכן מוינים בקורום שמע ישראל בוסכו נפשום אדונתונים ראש ישיבויס ותלמידים המוני עמפו שמו הביא למוינים קשים הוא ימיוד רמו צמי ילודים רבים צועקים עליך מנו דמו כל נקבע סתיו ונושם לא תחיי כל נשומו על שכבס אלפי מדרושות ואותי כנסיויס חיבוי ספרי תורה ולמדהו וכהנן בשיעור זוי שלחו באש מקדשי ציסו בינינו צופיויס ישלם המביאס אבהו יודין בגויים מולי גביויס זעקו שמיים ואדמו על אלפי היורויס מבצרי תורו עד זאופה כולסהו נאכלו מקיימה מסורו צדיקים זקנים וחסידים דבק ימונו תורו ביום גילנו מארצנו לא היה כזה כי לא נורו רחם אשר עשינו עבדנו משמיים למחנו יצחק תוישים ביעזר יועצה מצרים כל מבייס מקדשנו ונחמנו בכפליים רמנו וימנו לציון בירושלים
זריך למזכיר דור דור קדוש המייס אשר אז בחרתנו ויזכורים של דור האחרון נעים לנו שטובי בעבוד על משמעסו נפשו סמכו שגויים כי הם והחייב כדי מלהים ארץ הזרעים ועליהם זוכם הלך ישראל אב קבל מהי שמיים לא יעמיד ושבי ישראל נזכיר את לא יתחייס וסבא מסבא ישראל זר מתם אשר ילדה וגם הרס ובויס נהב ומחיים ובויס ומי נפרד צם דור שיסיס הסרש הכל נידף לעולם הטובים כנר פרס מייס מיני שבר בשי שישה אלפי פעמים אלפים שלישי אלבר בפרק כסר מן כרמי חלנהת זרת זהר מלתם חמיצר מכסבת זכוירה פרנקס ורש אלגס עזי ולארץ עלי הרי דמיים דמייס Namelessly Shachach Lanasa Kolchiel Ganicha Nehi Tzricha Mishudidei Lahakoi Saklav Zachar Safar Benoit Chatzar Ad Eis Nakana Banalu Vim B'Machanai Saprayim Shivadam B'Machan Varsha Sagumais Rabbi Sitzchai Klimas Rag B'Tzei Akoi Sagumais Ravain Simai Shiganit Zanachishon Nachashon Lichaya V'Chana Akoi Schalam Nikol Yachar Amachil L'Cham L'Eshkayach Simai Sashan Kitan Kishan Tilei Simat Sagid Chad Yaral Kol Shagis Nakan Echnakum Taif Taif Aib V'Sirchain Kuf We're going to sing the last one, so maybe just leave it on for the last Kinnot. Chai merachem ados chanachem asher lecho moed nechsefes or chodosh tazriach arnei hoy tatzmiach v'rach aleihim merachefes Litziyayin v'yareha k'mo yishaha v'tzireha v'chiv sulach agurasak al bal nireha Alei armoin asher nutash biashmasoin adoreha v'al bias mecharfeil v'soich mikdash chadoreha Alei galus mishar seyel mani meishir zimareha v'al damam asher shupach k'moy meimei yoireha Alei hegyoin mechai leleha Asher damam b'yareha v'al vad asher shamim uvitul sanhedreha Alei zivchei simideha ufid yoinei b'chayreha V'al chiluk klei heichal u'mizbach k'toireha Alei tapei melacheha b'nei David gevireha v'al yafyam asher chashach V'yei saruch esareha Alei chavoid asher gala V'yei schorban devireha V'al oichetz asher lochatz V'sam sakim chagureha Alei machar Mat v'roiv makois asher huku nezireha v'al niputz alei sela oila leha uniareha alei simchas oyeveha sachaku al shvareha v'alinoi b'nei chayrin nediveha t'hayreha alei fesha sharivisa silu derech ashureha v'al tzivah iskihaleha shizufeha shechayreha alei koilois mecharefeha b'yes rabu figareha v'al rigshas megadifeha v'soich mishkan chatzereha alei shimcha asher chulal b'fi kamei mitzireha v'al tachan yitzavechulach kishoy v'ushma amoreha elitzion v'yareha k'ma yisha v'tzireha v'chivsulach agur asak al bal niureha.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.